Hey everybody, welcome back once again to another episode of The Art of Photography. Today I want to talk about 35mm photography once again. This is a subject that we revisit from time to time, and it's a subject that's pretty fascinating to me on a number of levels. And I realize that there are a lot of people who watch this show who strictly shoot digital, who have no interest in doing film. But the reason I want to touch on this today is whether you're into film or not, I think there's so much you can learn from this. 35mm is a classic format. You know, about the time it started becoming popularized, it's kind of like the VHS beta thing. It wasn't a high quality format. It was kind of thought of as an amateur format. And a lot of that had to do with the film size because the negative, the actual picture on the negative is so small when you compare it to something larger like, you know, 120 format or even a 4x5, which have really large negatives. And so you have more resolution. But what 35mm did, and I think this is worth saying over and over, is it really revolutionized the history of photography and what was possible. All of a sudden you could take a camera into situations that you probably couldn't have had a camera in before. You could have taken things a lot faster so you can be more in the heat of the moment. And you know, as a lot of this developed, you really start to see a lot of that classic photojournalism in the 50s come around, and the whole Henri Cartier-Bresson and the decisive moment, Robert Frank, a lot of those guys who were shooting, you know, really improvisatory types of photography in a style that was highly journalistic, that was really about capturing the essence of the moment and that right moment, that decisive moment. And you know, if you imagine if Bresson had to carry around a large 4x5 or 8x10 view camera, it would have been a lot more difficult to get the types of images that in fact, it'd be impossible in most cases. I think he would have been a completely different photographer had 35mm not been, you know, the format of choice of that day. The other thing I want to say before we move in and I want to show you about manual 35mm cameras is that 35mm to me has a real specific look to it. And a couple years ago, well, more than a couple, probably about 10 years ago, I was at the Leica Gallery in New York over on Broadway. And they had a showing of, you know, it was a retrospective of a bunch of different photographers, but it was all photojournalistic in nature, all black and white. And when you're looking at these prints that are enlarged from 35mm negatives, you realize there is such a look that you don't get on anything else with that. It has the right amount of lo-fi quality, the right amount of graininess, the right amount of soul, if you will, mixed with, you know, the rest of the image. And it's not to the point where it deteriorates it and makes it a bad image. It's just, it has a wonderful blend of those two things. Plus, being an analog format using film, things like grain tend to be very beautiful, whereas a lot of times in digital, you know, and this is arguable, but you know, most people feel like digital noise is something completely different. It doesn't have that same aesthetic quality that grain does. It's usually something we're trying to avoid. So anyway, let's go over and I want to talk about one of my favorite cameras, and I want to talk about some ways to get into 35mm if you haven't, and some things you can think about. So come on over and let's have a look. Okay, so we're talking about 35mm cameras, and I want to show you the Nikon F3 today. And this is one of my favorite cameras of all time, and still is pretty much my main go-to camera when I shoot 35mm film. I absolutely love it. This is a Nikon F3 HP, which means there was an F3 and then the HP means high point, although I have owned both and I don't notice a huge difference. But basically this was a little bit higher point viewfinder, so if you wear eyeglasses, it's a little easier to shoot on, although I wear eyeglasses and the F3 is just fine as well. This camera, when it came out, was fairly revolutionary because it was one of the first cameras that would shoot in this new thing called aperture priority. And this is obviously kind of almost comical to think about now because aperture priority is very easy to do on any camera, and it's certainly not the most advanced mode that you can do. But at the time this was, and basically this means aperture priority, you set the aperture, you determine what the aperture is, and then the camera will meter and calculate the shutter speed for you. It's as easy as that. You can also shoot in manual mode if you want to on this as well. A set of batteries in here last years. You know, think about how often you have to recharge a digital camera. You just put a little watch-sized battery in here, and you'd be good to go for a long time. So if the battery wears out, there's a manual release with a fixed shutter speed of I think 90th of a second, and you know that shutter release is over on this side, so you can manually release the shutter if you need to. But the reason I'm showing you this, and I wanted to make the point, is that, you know, if you're going to experiment with older manual 35mm cameras or early 35mm cameras, this is an excellent way to go. There are other models as well, and I will put links to them in the show notes on the website. So go check out theartofphotography.tv if you want to see links to what I'm talking about. But obviously the Pentax K1000 was another huge groundbreaking model. The Canon AE program was another big one. Any of the Canons, the AE1, there's a whole slew of them. And usually you can get these cameras for a song these days. I mean, they're so cheap. The F3 was expensive when it came out, but this was really revolutionary. It came out in the late 70s, and this was in production for at least 20 years. I don't know the exact number offhand, but I think it was one of the longest running production cameras in the history of photography, which tells you how good it is. And let me show you why I like it so much. The Nikon F3 aperture priority, so I know it's hard to see here, so we'll remove the lens, but you can see that these older lenses had aperture rings on them, and there's all your apertures and how they're set there. So when we attach this to the camera, if I want f5.6, I just roll that up until it goes into the center. Now, I know you can't see through the eyepiece on here. There's only two things you see through the eyepiece on here. You see a little LCD display that tells you what the shutter speed is. So, if it's getting too slow to hand hold, you know that that's an issue. And back in those days, we just knew what shutter speeds acted like. And then you also see a little mirror window that actually is part of the viewfinder that shows you what, it's just literally just a illuminated mirrored reflection of what the aperture dial is. So you can see exactly what your f-stop is, and you can see what your shutter speed is. You don't need to know anymore. It's a film camera, so your film was a fixed ISO, so whatever you shot the roll at was what you shot the roll at. You simply select the film speed by lifting this dial and turning it. I've set it 100 right now, and we would turn that around to set it to 400 or 16 or whatever it is that we're shooting at. This will meter all the way up to, I believe, you can get 64 out of here. I think you have to go to 3200 and then push it up a stop, but it is possible. And then the only dials you have on here are the film advance. You have the shutter button, and you have your, I believe this is set in automatic. If you want to go manual mode fully, you take this out of auto and just pick your shutter speed, and it's that easy. There's also a bulb, a time, an X-Sync for flash, and that's really all there is. On the front of the camera, this is the lens release. Over here we have the manual. If the battery does die, you pull this forward, and if it's wound, that'll give you a manual release of about a 90th of a second. And then up here we have the depth of field preview button. So if you want to stop down and see what your depth of field is, it's there. And that's all there is to this camera. There are no other features. I wish that a digital camera manufacturer would come out with a camera that this is this simple to use. It would be a home run. Because the cool thing about this is it allowed you to not worry about the camera from a technical perspective when you were out shooting. It allowed you to freed you up to concentrate on the picture you were making. The viewfinder in here is much bigger and brighter than just about any digital camera on the market, particularly DX size sensors and the APS-C stuff. And it's just basically because it's, well, in film terms, it is full frame if you want to compare that to digital now, but it enabled you to have a better viewfinder on here too, so you can see more accurately. It is not autofocus, but that's the deal, is the bigger viewfinder allows you to see more clarity in what you're doing and focus with accuracy that way. I did fail to mention there is also a self-timer mode on here, so if you want to shoot selfies and run around to the front of the camera, you can certainly do so. And I can't remember what that is, but this little light dials up. I can't remember what the time is. It counts down and starts blinking and then shoots. So anyway, that is the Nikon F3. I wish there were more to show you on this camera. And Nikon, if you go look it up online, there were an amazing amount of accessories and parts. There were different viewfinders. You could do a more like a TLR style camera where you look down into it and had a mirror that way. And there were other viewfinders for different applications. Obviously a huge number of lenses. The flash system on these was a little janky because there's no real hot shoe on here. You have to get an adapter that kind of goes over here, and there were flashes made for the F3, or you can get the adapters, and then they kind of go over your film winder. By the way, when you're done winding with the roll of film, this is how you release it and roll the film up with that dial. It doesn't get much easier than this. And what I really recommend that you guys do, because we're going to start talking about film types in the next couple episodes, but why not get a camera and experiment with it? You can get these very cheaply these days. I don't remember what the exact going price is. The Nikon F3 is kind of the upper end of that spectrum anyway. If you wanted to go get a Pentax K1000, or if you look at some of the older Canons, and shoot, you probably don't even need aperture priority metering. Learn how to do it manually. But go shoot some film and, experiment with this and see if you can, find looks that you like that film gives you. So anyway, once again, it's the Nikon F3. I sing the praises of that quite a bit. It is one of my favorite cameras. It's one of the best in existence, I think. Obviously, I recommend this as a great place to start. And you know, like I said, wouldn't you love to have a digital camera that was this simple to use? No computer screens, it's all dials, knobs, and buttons, and you just shoot. You concentrate on getting better pictures and not fighting with your camera. So anyway, that's the Nikon F3. Okay, so that has been today's coverage on 35mm photography. I know we've revisited this a lot, and it's something that I think there's a lot to learn from. And my point today is that, you know, you can get into shooting 35mm for very little money. Sure, there is film and there's processing and all that stuff, but still, compared to what a nice digital camera costs, you know, it's a fraction, you know, an embarrassing fraction, considering that a lot of these cameras, when they were new, cost what digital cameras cost now, and you can get them, you know, for dollars now. So anyway, I think it's worth experimenting with if you've never done it. It's something that's worth getting into. And plus, I just think the way cameras used to be designed, where it was kind of this aperture priority thing exclusively, you know, there's a lot there that you can take from and learn in that simplification as a photographer. So anyway, I hope this has been useful to you. Once again, this has been The Art of Photography. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.